Okay, hello everyone and happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this month's webinar, What to Ask and When to Ask It, Questioning Strategies for Donor Conversations. My name is Christine Kim and I am the project coordinator for the Fundraising Academy. I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, a couple of notes. This webinar will be conversational with the opportunity to ask questions during, as well as a 30-minute Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the Q&A option within your Zoom controls. The chat function can also be utilized in case you'd like to ask us any personal questions, and you can also ask questions anonymously through the Q&A. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. To enable the setting, click the CC option in your Zoom controls. Caption size can be adjusted in the video settings under accessibility. In the days following the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to access the slide deck and the recording to review at your leisure. So thank you all. You've got a cause, learn how to fund it. At Fundraising Academy Cause Selling Education, we enhance fundraiser skills so they can develop and sustain donor relationships to advance their cause in today's growing giving landscape through a proven contemporary curriculum presented by world-class nonprofit fundraising leaders. We want to take a moment to recognize our important affiliate partners who provide training and education to fundraisers nationally. Check out the map to find an institute in your community. Now I am very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Tim Hogan, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Roadtrip Nation. Roadtrip Nation is a media and education company that helps people identify and pursue a fulfilling life and career aligned with their interests. Tim and his team focus on partnerships with companies, foundations, education platforms, and higher education institutions that help produce career exploration content, in addition to licensing partnerships that help the organization reach 14 million students and 60 million households annually. Tim has previously worked with Boys and Girls Club of America and with the annual fund at the Georgetown University Athletic Department. Tim resides in San Diego with his incredibly impressive wife, Kendra, and has a passion for soccer, having worked as an assistant coach at Georgetown University, Florida Gulf Coast University, University of California, Riverside, and University of California, San Diego. He holds a BA in English and Classics from Georgetown University and an MA in English from Florida Gulf Coast University. Welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Christine. It's really nice to be here with you all and with this group at this point. I'd love to be in the same room with everybody. I've been in the same room for the last year plus, like the rest of us have. My apologies for the size of my face. I'm not going to sit like this the entire call. That may be a little much, but so thank you all for taking the time to do this. I know in the middle of middle of the work week, blocking out an hour and a half to have these discussions is awfully tough, right? But I think it's important for us in this industry to do these kinds of sessions, formal and informal, just because we don't really operate in an industry that's particularly scientific, right? Unless you're raising money for scientific research, but we have to figure out what our own formula is in the moment. There's not just a simple formula we can check the boxes on and ensure that money's coming in the door for our particular cause. I think the other thing to keep in mind too is recognizing we don't often have peers in our own organizations. If you're working for a very large nonprofit, national or global, the teams are larger, but even in those environments, you don't often have somebody who has the exact same job that you do. And then certainly when we're working in smaller or regional or local nonprofits, you're oftentimes the only one. And it's hard to find places where you can bounce ideas off of other folks, even if it's your supervisor or folks on your team. It's not quite the same. And these are the kind of environments that Sanford Institute of Philanthropy helps set up. But I think it's also important for us to find these opportunities wherever we can, so that we can bounce ideas off of each other and to be fair, really steal ideas from one another. And that's why I do this. The people that I speak to after this session are probably going to get a little bit more from me than the ones that I spoke to this morning, just because we'll be able to steal ideas from each other. To get started, recognizing that this will be as interactive as it can be, especially as we get toward the end and we get into the Q&A. the presentation itself will hopefully set the stage for it. But to kind of get that, engagement started, if you could drop into the, Christine, tell me, chat or Q&A, poll, there we go. She's on it. I don't even know why I need to ask questions. But fill in years of fundraising experience. And I always think this is an interesting question. One, to kind of figure out who's out there, because Christine and I are kind of seeing each other. We assume you're out there based on the number of people that are filling this out. But I think the reality is that, certainly there's nothing that can replace experience. But at the same time, because of my point about the fact that we don't quite have peers right next to us all the time, spending 40 years in a particular position and not talking to anybody else about that work is, not necessarily better than being in fundraising for 5 years and finding opportunities like this to have these discussions. So we've got a little bit of everything, right? Just based on those answers, which is excellent, right? But I think especially to the 40% of folks who are new to fundraising, please recognize that it doesn't mean you have to wait 10 years before you can really wrap your arms around this. We're all learning from each other at different moments, because we essentially play 4-dimensional chess when we're trying to figure out how to connect with the right donors. So thanks for doing that. That's a really helpful step for me to get an idea of who's out there, also how many of you are out there. But again, the experience comes in the value and the depth of the discussions that we have with each other, not just years, checking the boxes of bringing dollars in the door. So really what we're going to aim to, can I share these results? Everybody see this? There we go. Let me get this out of here. Technical difficulties or technical stumbling along. We think about what we're going to cover today. We're going to walk through a 5-step strategy for asking questions. And the way I think about this is it's important for us to have rules that we can break and bend. Knowing that we've got a strategy going into pretty much every conversation we try to have with a donor is important. Knowing that we don't know exactly how it's going to go. We don't know what kind of day they're having. We don't know what kind of phone call or email is going to come through while you're chatting with them. But I think it is important to have some guardrails for those discussions, and we'll walk through that 5-step strategy. We'll also talk about the importance of developing genuine listening skills. And actually, I talk about this with my wife a lot. She works in a similar but very different industry, but focused on relationship building, not in the fundraising world. And a lot of what both of our jobs entail is just being able to listen to folks who are trying to get things from us, or we're trying to get things from them, to put it very crassly here. But the listening skills are not just something you happen to be good at. They are the kinds of things you have to hone all the time, especially in the kind of work that we're doing. Along the same lines, the questioning techniques that will help us build trust. I think the goal, and I'll probably say this several times throughout this presentation, but the goal of most of these conversations is to get to the next conversation. When we're talking about the ask discussion, obviously we want checks and wire transfers and so forth at the end of that discussion. But for these, we're really trying to just keep the thing moving, right? Keep the conversation moving, build the partnership, and make that relationship a bit deeper as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can, right? The clock is always ticking in our world, but at the same time, you don't have to have the slam dunk in every conversation. You're really just trying to get to the next one. And then this last part, this last objective, I really like, is you're trying to listen between the lines, and that can mean so many different things. But I think what we'll see as we talk through some of this is that the donor doesn't always know what they want either. You might be asking a question that they haven't really heard before, right? Or they haven't thought about that way, and finding the right way to not freak them out with really heavy, deep questions, but to ask questions that get them talking, and you can start to pull out answers that they may not even realize that they're giving. So as we think about, what is this portion of the process? What is, need discovery? And, I think when we talk about need in our world, the first reaction, if you're, folding laundry right now and kind of casually looking over at the screen, you see need, right? It's what's the purpose? What's the need within society that we are solving here at the organization? But really, this is very much about, the need of the donor. And that may have absolutely nothing to do with the mission of your organization, especially early in conversations as you're building relationships. The need may be for them that they are, trying to connect to the community for the first time. It may be, guilt, for better or worse, right? As we've all been hopefully a bit more reflective over the last year, and they're trying to find their connection points to doing better for the world. You don't know what it is, right? Again, it will eventually get to the conversation about the work that you do in your organization, how it ties to to their individual needs, but recognize this portion of the process is very much just about the person, not even necessarily the person within the context of what your organization is trying to accomplish. So, and again, I love the need discovery within the big heart. I mean, this is core to it, right? No matter where you are in the process, if you're not putting the donor first, the kind of statement that we all hear in these types of trainings, right? Of course, it's got to be the donor first, but not the donor first so that you're telling them first what it is you're trying to accomplish, but they're choosing to spend time with you. They're choosing to spend their money with your organization. It's important to understand what it is they want, not just from the process right now, but into the future, so you can plan how much you're going to bother them and how you're going to bother them, right? And I say that a bit tongue in cheek, but the reality is they know you're a fundraiser. When they hear from you, they're expecting to be asked for money. If you're able to build that build that rapport, build that relationship, understanding what their needs are going to be from that relationship, you're going to have softer ground when you get to the fun part, which is making the big ask. Oops. So when we're thinking about the objectives as you're developing your question strategy, right? I mean, first you're thinking about what the hot button issue is for that donor. Again, this may have nothing to do with your particular cause. You're trying to figure out why they're sitting with you, right? Whether it's the first time or the fifth time, why are they still there? I think as we progress through these conversations, the hot button is going to be more related to your mission and the work that your organization does, assuming that the conversations are progressing the way you'd like them to. But understand that this really is about what that person is going to need from this relationship, the same way you would with any friendship or any relationship with a family member. We're just going about it a bit more formally, right? Because we're doing it in the context of bringing money in for our organization. Build rapport and foster trust, right? I mean, again, I think we'll continue to repeat that. I don't think that's a real groundbreaking thing to say, but as you're thinking about how important that is in fundraising, when you're working with organizations, companies, foundations, et cetera, you need to build that relationship. But at the same time, they don't have to like you to decide that you're the right organization to give money to. If everything your organization has done from an impact standpoint, from an efficiency of your business standpoint, is right in line with what they want to accomplish as an organization, they can get past the fact that they don't get along with you necessarily all that well. And I'm not saying it's going to be, you don't want it to be ugly, because they probably would walk away, but the tightness of that relationship is not nearly as important as it is on an individual basis, right? Because the strategy of an individual giving is not the same kind of process as it is for an organization. So just kind of underlining a few more times the importance of that rapport and fostering that trust. The key problems that your organization is currently addressing, that's an interesting one, I think, because of where you may be in the conversation with the potential donor. The reality is they may not understand the problems. They may not even understand what you do yet, right? And I think we've all been reminded, when you're having even the third or fourth conversation with someone and you repeat something that is so second nature to you in terms of how your organization operates, and you get a blank stare back, right? They don't do this all day, every day. They spend time on this when they're with you. Maybe they even prepare for their meeting with you, but oftentimes not. So I think this is a key point that we'll start pulling out as we get into the 5-step strategy of start pulling out what those key problems that you all can agree on, because first they need to understand them, and then you're going to need to read between the lines on which of those are going to be of greatest interest to them. And that's where you kind of double down and try to focus your conversations on them as much as you can. And then lastly, make sure the donor has the ability to make the decision, right? Not that there are not relationships you need to build that get you to the next person, that get you to the next person, that get you to the person who can make the decision. But it's also incredibly important for us to be conscious of our time and recognize how valuable our time truly is. We operate in an environment where lots of people would be willing to talk to us because we do good things. Our organization is here to save the world, right? So they feel bad, pushing us off to the side. Not everybody, we've all been pushed aside plenty of times, right? But I think it is important for you to be, to have the respect for yourself in terms of what it is you need to accomplish for your organization. And if you're working with somebody who's just not anywhere close to being the one who can make the decision, manage your time wisely there. Doesn't mean you just stop taking their phone calls, but maybe you're not doing a 3-hour lunch with them if they're not going to be the one to help bring dollars in the door. So planning your questions. I think this is always an interesting one. I had an early part of my career before I got into fundraising. I was working in journalism. We're in a daily newspaper, and when you're going to do a feature story, or sit down to conduct an interview, I always went with my questions, right? But the reality is, you don't always read them, right? It's really just your preparation process. I mean, for example, the notes that I took for the conversation today, I haven't looked at them yet. I'll probably cover some of them. I may glance down, but really they are part of the preparation for you to make sure you know what you're going to try to get into during that discussion. As simple as it sounds, right? So that doesn't mean reading your questions when you get there, but know what it is you want to accomplish before you sit down. The importance of that is it starts to establish that trust, right? Now, basically just focusing on asking questions, not even just which questions you're asking, because they understand that you're trying to learn from them, and that's going to start to break down the walls a little bit. They know you're a fundraiser. Keep that in mind, right? They know that you're trying to get money out of their pocket, but if you're asking them questions and getting them to be doing the talking, that's a win, right? As it relates to their enthusiasm about your cause, recognize where they are in the process. I worked for, Christine mentioned, I worked for Boys and Girls Clubs of America for quite a long time. And I think that's an organization that people know the brand, people know that it probably helps boys and girls, right? Even if they know nothing else. And what'll happen is that if you think that as the donor, you think you may fully understand what it is the organization does. And the reality is, as we all know, organizations are much more complex than the titles, can suggest. So it's important for these questions to start to figure out what it is they're excited about, what they're enthusiastic about, whether they even know that it's connected to the cause of your organization or not. As we talked about before, the prospect's role in the decision-making process. Again, it's not to say that the person signing the check is the only person that you can speak to, right? And that's very rarely the case. That's all the only folks you interact with. But it's good to understand where they fit in this, right? Because the rapport you'll have with somebody who's earlier on in the process, who's going to kind of be your champion throughout, is going to be a little bit more, a little bit more tight knit. You're going to want to be arm in arm with them so that you're kind of making the ask internally together. Whereas if it's somebody who wants to get to the end of this conversation and decide whether they're giving you money or not, this is important for you to know as you're crafting the questions that you're going to ask as part of this discussion. And I think this last one's a great reminder for all of us, is that we start to speak in the language of our organizations. And if anybody's joined a new organization recently, that group of folks that's early in their fundraising careers, I'm imagining you're probably new to the organizations that you're working for. Those first couple of meetings, like, what is that? What's ASA? What's BCD? You don't know what these terms are, right? And you need to dumb it down a little bit for the audience that you're working with. Part of my role at Boys and Girls Clubs of America several years ago was to take what we had as a 150-page strategic plan for the organization, which was full of technical jargon. I had worked there for a number of years and still wasn't following all of it. Had to ask some clarifying questions. But my role is to take that strategic plan and essentially dumb it down for our fundraisers, so they could dumb it down to the folks that they were talking to. You want to be accurate, right, with what your organization does, but recognize how much they really need to understand in terms of the technical language, and don't scare them away by getting really passionate about something that they're not following. This is an important part of it too, in recognize and preparing for what the responses are likely going to be. The reality is, you're probably going to be wrong. You're not going to be able to use your crystal ball to figure out all of the answers that may be coming. You're going to need to be on your toes. That's just part of our job. But by thinking through this, you're going to improve your own confidence going into these conversations, even if the things you thought might be the responses you prepared are not the ones you're using. You're a little bit more nimble and you're a little bit more comfortable with what might be coming. Simple as that sounds, right? Nice reminder, tell it to yourself as you're walking into the coffee shop or the boardroom. But if you have those prepared responses, I think you especially notice it when you first sit down, that I'm ready for this wherever it goes. And that doesn't have to be a major lift, right? And I think this is the kind of thing where there are times where I'll take the where I think the conversation is going and jot it all down. There are times where I do it. I put it into Word documents so I can go back and look at it. Sometimes I'm doing it in the car on the way to the conversation or on the way to the meeting and just talking myself through it. I was mentioning to Christine and Pearl at the beginning of the call that, even this morning, I was doing a little talking to myself as I was thinking about just kind of the introduction to the conversation today and all of that. Not a big deal for my wife. She's heard me do that, plenty of times. My brother-in-law is visiting, and he's kind of just passing me in the kitchen this morning getting his coffee. What the hell is this guy doing? He's just talking to himself, right? But this is part of it, right? Prepare yourself for what may be coming, just because you're going to be a bit more comfortable with what's coming, even if you're wrong. And I think that the other part of the preparation is not just the responses, but what could the transitions be, right? You're going to know a little bit about this donor before you sit down, but not nearly as much as you will when you get up, of course. But what are the things that they will probably talk about? If they travel a ton, right? Are they going to be talking about, the excitement of getting back on an airplane because they hadn't in a year because we've had such a strange, 15 months. Think about how you can tie that into something that you've done recently or the organization has done recently. Think along those lines. Again, same kind of ideas that if you've got jumping off points in your mind about where the conversation can go, it's going to be a bit more of a smooth conversation rather than a donor sitting there feeling like you're just running through a list of questions that you're trying to get the answers for. Establishing a clear agenda. I think this is funny to think about in terms of who you're sitting with, right? If you're sitting with a group of 10 board members, right, and they have you on the on the docket, and they're going to hear your presentation, they're going to decide at the end of that presentation, whether or not they're going to donate to your organization. Of course, right? You need a very clear agenda because that's what that kind of environment asks for. If you're sitting down with somebody for the first time, or even the third or fourth time, and you're just having a coffee, and it's supposed to be just a comfortable conversation, having an understanding of what you're getting into is what's really important, right? So again, they know you're a fundraiser, but I think it can be helpful to take the pressure off of these conversations by being like, look, I really just want to get to know you a little bit and let you know some of the things that have been going on with the organization, kind of soften the ground some. So they're in their mind, right, especially if they're not an experienced donor or have not worked with a lot of organizations, what they're hearing is, oh, good, I just get to hear about what some organizations are doing in the community, and I don't have to do anything. If I think it's a bad idea, I'm going to have an easy out. That may or may not be the case, right? How you wrap up the conversation, but you're trying to bring the walls down, because even if you convince them to make one donation, right, based on pressure, guilt, first conversation, I need this money in the door now, they're not coming back. It's not going to be a strong relationship. You got to think about this as not just the $50 or $500 that's going to come in specific to this ask, but you're trying to build a partner, right, who's going to be with you for the long haul. If it's $50 every year for the next 20 years, that's great. If it's $50 turns into $100, turns into 500, turns into 1,000, even better. This may be somebody who ends up being your board chair a little bit further down the road. So as anxious as we often getting closer to June 30th or December 31st or whatever your fiscal year is, going into these conversations, maybe not all day, every day, when you're sitting at your desk, but especially going into the conversations, try to take the pressure off of the donor and take the pressure off of yourself that you have to solve everything and have some huge, big windfall by the end of this discussion. You'll get it sometimes, and those are nice wins to celebrate, but at the same time, keep your expectations in the right place for these discussions, which is, again, like I've already said a couple of times, and we'll probably say a few more times, the goal here is to get to the next discussion, to get to the next conversation so you can move things forward. And just a good last reminder here in this last bullet about what you're getting into. These are nice, I think, phrasing for the prep, whether it's via email or in the phone call conversation before the meeting. It's like, here's what we're doing. I'm just trying to understand what you're into, trying to and help you understand what we're doing and educate you on that. That's the entire purpose, again, to kind of bring the walls down a little bit so that you actually can build a strong relationship. Getting permission to ask questions, can I ask you a question? Well, you kind of just did, right? So like that can be a bit uncomfortable, but I think that the purpose here is that you're giving them time to understand that they're going to have to be involved in this, right? Because if you sit down and, kind of like we're interacting right now, I'm talking at you. And if we sit down and I'm all excited and I'm telling you all the great things that we do, and I'm telling you about my trip, my first flight that I took since the pandemic started to cease a little bit, they're going to sit back and be like, okay, great, this is just a fundraiser who's going to ramble at me for a while, and then we'll call it a day. I think of the getting permission to ask questions as really buying them some time to think about how to answer those questions. If they say no to you asking questions, that's a whole different webinar, right? Like, what are we doing here? And I don't mean to downplay that, because I'm sure things like that happen, but really what you're trying to do is help them understand that this is going to be me getting information out of you, but not in a grilling you kind of way. We want to do it gently. We want to do it at the, at the right pace. This is a nice example here on the screen. Obviously, you need to turn it into your own voice. This isn't exactly how I would say it, but I would find a way to do it and get across the same point. Again, it's about bringing that barrier down a little bit, even though you're putting a bit of pressure on them, because they're going to have to perform in this conversation, right? They're going to have to be the other half of the relationship and share some information with you. Questioning with purpose. I mean, I think what you're trying to do here is really not overwhelm them, right, with how many things you're going to get through, right? You don't have to get to all the answers that you want in the first 5 minutes. You don't need to get to all the answers you want by the end of the conversation. So keep yourself at the appropriate pace, cover one topic at a time. If you had prepared in your mind that the response to one particular question would be very quick and you'd be able to move on to the next topic, but they're really excited about talking about the gala that your organization did 15 years ago that they attended and they never heard from again. Okay, right? If they're really excited about talking about the meals and the colors and all of that good stuff that happened at the event, not really relevant necessarily to what you're trying to accomplish, but they're talking, they're getting closer to it, they're giving you information a little bit, but the conversation needs to go at the pace that they're comfortable with. And then we're going to start talking about some ways you can frame these questions, but again, you're trying to ask questions in a way that put that gentle pressure on them that they need to elaborate, that they need to be talking, right? So I think as fundraisers, we tend to be pretty good at filling the empty air in a conversation. If nobody's answering, I'm happy to. I'll tell you what I think. And not everybody's got that same comfort level, especially donors who may have a bit of a guard up. But you can word your questions in such a way that they'll be a bit more comfortable filling in some of that air, if you will, and giving you more information, even if they feel like they're rambling. One thing I wanted to add here too, as you're asking these specific questions, right, that are going to try to keep the conversation moving, is about taking notes in these conversations, right? So again, if it's a formal environment, boardroom, everybody's got paper and laptops out and so forth. That seems a bit easier. But if it's a little bit more informal, especially early in the relationship building, notes are not a bad thing. I don't think you necessarily want to bring, a full binder, 3-ring, with loose leaf paper falling all over the place. You're trying to find the right section. You're putting their title on and the date, right, to make sure you can organize it. I don't think you want to make a big formality out of it, but I've got, how I keep my notes in a big formal meeting, but then I've got a tiny little notebook that fits in my back pocket because I may need to jot something down to remember from that discussion, even though I may not be sitting here taking notes throughout the entire meeting. I think it's actually well received in most cases. If you're able to say, do you mind, I just want to make sure I don't forget this, and you're pulling your notes out, that can be usually a sign that I'm taking this seriously. I want to do this as well as I possibly can. And it's also a bit of a reminder that this isn't just a chat. There is an end goal as part of this discussion, even if we may not accomplish it in today's discussion. There's an end goal that we're trying to achieve, and I'm going to keep tabs on it because that's my job, and that's what I want my organization to. That's what my organization is asking me to do. We're going to move into I call it a semi-interactive session, right, or portion of the session. You all are not involved, right? You all are watching closely. And I say that, somewhat jokingly, right? But Christine and I are going to walk through a bit of a role play, and then we can kind of talk through some of it. And then I want to reiterate the importance of using role play to get us better at this type of work and the different kind of environments we can do it. I'll start this off by saying role play is weird. It's uncomfortable. And Christine and I are probably going to giggle through it because we're kind of working from a loose script here. But it is incredibly helpful. And so I'm getting a little better right now because we're gonna walk through this. So Christine, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Christine, have you and your family done any traveling recently? I know it's been a weird year.
Yes, we actually just went to Hawaii this year.
Oh, no way. I've never been to Hawaii. What's your favorite part of the trip? I would assume just beaches and getting away. But what was the neatest part of that trip?
I really enjoyed this helicopter volcano tour that we were able to get.
No way. I've got assumptions on using my context clues, but what are those tours like?
Oh, well, we were able to fly right over an active volcano, and I swear you could feel the heat rising up out of the volcano while we were flying.
That's incredible. That's amazing. We've always talked about wanting to do that. It's just a lot of coordination, cost, and I don't know, the logistics freak me out, but it's not a small adventure. It's something that we like to do if we can get all the ducks in a row.
Yeah, it was a lot of work to try to plan it all out and schedule everything.
Yeah, and a part of my work actually deals a lot with that kind of that kind of issue, the transportation, right? The cost and just the details of making it happen.
Oh, really? Transportation? Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, a lot of people think that government relief agencies will transport donations overseas without any charge, like free of charge, right? So if I'm going to send a box of socks to a village who just that is in need, the assumption is that that the government will cover that, and there's not an additional cost to make that happen.
I also thought that that was true. Do you get some sort of a cost break or anything like that?
We don't. It's one of those things that's just kind of a hidden detail of doing well or doing good things, right? And we take on those costs, including the customs fees and things like that. So it's an important part of the work because that first step is the donation of the socks. But if they're sitting in our offices and can't get where they need to go, we've just created a whole lot of work and no impact for anybody.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I didn't think of that.
So think about this. What does it cost to buy a t-shirt? Like, what's a t-shirt cost?
Oh, like $10, $15.
Sure, right. So around $15. So if you're shipping $15 shirts for a village of 500 kids, that's a significant cost, and is in some cases it costs as much as the clothes themselves, and that's just the transportation. I mean, how does that make it? Try wrapping your head around that. What does that make you think about the donation of t-shirts if you're going to have to essentially double the cost of the t-shirts just to get them where they're going?
Oh, yeah, I never thought of how it would cost so much more. It definitely adds a new level of challenges that you have to do in your work.
For sure. And scene. I'm glad I did, because I don't know enough about transportation costs to take that too much further. I don't know if Christine, you could have carried it. So yeah, I mean, I think what we do here, right, is if thoughts and ideas and reactions and questions you can drop into the Q&A. We'd love them. And if Christine, if you can help if anything pops through. I also recognize that you're just kind of digesting that, and maybe references to this will come up more in the Q&A. I think we're humble enough to recognize that people aren't like, oh, good, I've been waiting for this, the Christine and Tim role play. So if questions come up, Christine, just shout them out and we'll talk through them. But otherwise, this may be something we can reference as we get into the Q&A. The importance of that, though, right? Because that was a little funny, and you could probably tell when I gave fake facial reactions and when I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to say next as it relates to transportation costs. There's value in what we just did, though, right? For me, I just got a little sharper in terms of how you dance through something how do I make this transition? And I think the other thing that we tend to think of in role play work is that it's something that has to be some big elaborate process where we're setting time for it, we're getting several folks involved, we're setting the agenda, and it doesn't have to be. I was having a conversation with somebody I've been working with last week, and we did probably a 3-minute role play. He was working on something in a kind of a new audience that he was trying to get to. And he's like, can we just try this? Sure, right? Little uncomfortable, right? I stumbled over my words. I popped out a character accidentally in the middle of it, but we just spent a few minutes on it, and it helps you figure out where your gaps in your pitch, your angle are truly going to be. So it can be done, just one-on-one conversations with peers, hopefully that you're, connections that you're making through Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, or you can do it with family members, right? Sometimes your spouses are like, what the heck do you do? I don't know. It happens in my house, right? And so you can throw it out as an activity, that maybe get your kids involved in it too, right? There's ways to do it. It doesn't have to be all that elaborate. I will say that when there are opportunities to make it a bit more formal, there's so much that can come from it. We went through a process at Boys and Girls Club of America, again, a bigger team, right? That I was a part of at that time, which is not always a luxury that we have. But one of the things we did is during our team meetings, the role play that we needed to do was with the sales team, new business development team, which is 10 or 12 people, but the department is about 50 folks, right? So administrative support, account management, all of that. Again, I recognize most of us, myself included, are not in environments like that. What we did is in that in-person meeting, we would put the phone in the middle of the room and put one person who was going through the role play, and they would sit there by the phone. The person who was doing the other half of the role play would go out in the hall on their cell phone, right? The person who's being grilled, the person who's having to perform is in the room. So you're having a phone conversation, doing a bit of a role play, but all the people on your team who don't do sales are sitting in there listening to you. Everybody hated it until they did it. Because what you're doing is a couple of things, right? You're putting pressure on yourself to try to perform in the most difficult environment. It's like running with a parachute, because you're talking about your organization in front of people that already know what your organization does. But the other part of it, though, is we were presenting to the rest of the team who's not in the sales mode, not in fundraising mode all day, every day, how hard the job truly is, right? If you're not involved in it, fundraising sounds just nice, loosey-goosey, especially if the organization is doing well. Yeah, I just talk to folks and they give us money and helps us do what we do. When we first started doing that, I watched the account management team go, okay, yeah, all right, I'll stay right here. But I also watched some people go, I want to do that, right? And so you'll start to pull those things out. So there's a number of ways you could do that within your organization. And again, there's lots of ways you can kind of twist what I just walked through just as an example. But again, there's a lot of value in doing role play on big scales, but on much tighter, quick 2-3 minute scales can be helpful as well. So Christine, good job. That was fun.
Thank you. Also, we had a really nice comment from one of our participants that said, I call it practice the art of curiosity. It's just being curious about the other person for basic relationship building. And I like the way that they phrase that.
I love that. I think that's amazing, right? And those are the kind of things that, not that you're going to be sitting around at the holidays so trying to figure out how you get better at fundraising, right? Turn your brain off. Don't think about this. But I find myself in conversations with, store clerks, right? Or distant relatives I don't see that often. You're practicing those questions, right? You're getting something out of it. And you may find that people actually enjoy it. You're going to be a little bit closer with your family. You're going to get a hello when you walk into that store again. But I love that. Practicing the art of curiosity is right on. Some days you don't want to, right? Some days I don't want to talk to the store clerk, and that's fine. Some days I don't want to talk to my family, and that's fine too. But I love the way that's put. All right, jumping into how to ask good questions. I think these are, the way we think about these is, closed-ended, open-ended questions, right? And I think we've all heard these things, these kinds of, formats, if you will, or this kind of structure. Closed-ended is going to give us yes or no answers. There are times to ask these types of questions, and then the person will elaborate on them, or you can find ways to have them, or to help them elaborate on them, right? But you prefer to get into these open-ended questions to get them rambling. You want them talking. Even if they're BSing, you're going to start pulling out valuable info. We talked at the beginning about the fact that they may not know what their priorities are. They may not know what they're passionate about your organization, just because they're not as in tune with it as you are. So it's important to find ways to ask questions that if they don't start talking, it's going to be uncomfortable. Again, it's the gentle push to get them involved in this. They're not there just to hear a presentation. They're there to share information to figure out whether or not it's worth it for you all to chat again. And again, you can see these examples, and I'm sure you can come up with plenty others. Well, preparing yourself. So again, if you're folding laundry, set it down for just a moment, because we may need you to drop some things into the Q&A here. But we're going to walk through a couple of types of questions. And it'll be helpful if you can drop in examples that come to mind as we're walking through them. So this first one is personal questions. So this example here, and again, get your gears turning and start dropping them in as you think of them. The example we have here, how would you describe your personal mission? If you sat down with somebody, first time you met them, having coffee, where are you from? Have you traveled recently? Is your family doing okay through all of this? All right, good to meet you. And then you turn and say, how would you describe your personal mission? That's probably uncomfortable, right? Maybe for the right person, right? Maybe for the right dynamic, it can work, but that is a lot, right? So you are trying to find out things about their history, their own personal journey in working with organizations like yours, if they have one at all, to help find out what they're excited about. Christine, hopefully some things are popping through. If not, maybe we can give some examples and come back to it a bit later. But are there any coming through or examples of personal questions that can kind of help get a conversation moving?
None yet, but if
Okay.
anybody is brave enough to raise their hand and would like to unmute, please feel free as well. Oh, we have
All right.
a hand raised. One question I'm going to allow to talk, so let me know if you can unmute. Teresa, I think you should be able to.
Yes, hello. Thank you so
Hello.
much for allowing me to ask my question. I work for an organization that helps military families. So one thing I oftentimes like to ask is, what is their particular affinity or association with the military? Have they served? Have their family members served, etc.?
It's a perfect example, right? And I think that's the kind of thing where there's a very good chance there's an answer, right? If you ask a question that's, do you have any connection to the Navy between the years of 1982 and 1985? What, right? You're hitting on something very, very specific. But Teresa, your example there, a pretty good chance, not giving you a percentage here, there's a very good chance that they're going to be able to give some sort of answer. It may be that they served, it may be that their parents served, or they have a sibling that served. They're going to know somebody, they're going to have some sort of reaction to that question. And you've got them talking, right? And you've got them talking from their connection to it, no matter how strong it may or may not be.
Thank you so much for sharing, Teresa. Next, I'm going to see if Shannon, if you'd like to unmute.
That's so funny. Hi, it's Shannon. We also help the military and the veterans, but I was thinking on a different level from that. I was going to ask them, since the last 15 months have been a very unique experience, have they gotten into anything specific, like a hobby or something? Because like me and my friends, like literally we were in debt with this paint and these things from Michael's. Like I'm gonna have to bring you guys these like wood things. They're so cheesy, but literally that's all we've been doing, right? And so, or if they said something like that, then I would know they think more on like a creative level. And so maybe something I would approach them through a creative aspect of what we're doing. And if they were more like a, technical or, oh, I love like 25,000 piece puzzles, then I'd be like, oh, okay. They're more into like the details. That's kind of where I was thinking. But yeah, so something like that.
I think that's a great example, right? Focusing on something that we're all dealing with. And the thing is, we've all been dealing with something over the course of the last 15 months or whatever it's been, and hopefully we're able to stay on this path, at least in this country, that's the question, right? Is you can ask for the silver linings or the positives of this crazy time. Whereas to be fair, in October that was a harder question, still a great question, but you probably couldn't get to it as fast because you had to get through the how are you? And I'm not saying that that's not a question to ask now, but it was rude in the middle of last fall to not start with that question. Shannon, I think that's a perfect example.
Not even have approached it. Yeah, people were so didn't even know what we were doing. Yeah, you're right. That would have been a scary question.
Yeah. And I think everybody on this call had an answer to your question, right? And mine was I picked up the guitar I haven't touched in 10 years and played it a lot for like 3 weeks. And I haven't touched it yet, right? So like there's something there, right? So you've learned that I don't stick to what I intend to do. There's the reading between the lines on my answer. So
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you so much for sharing. We have a couple more that were just chatted in.
Great.
What are you passionate about?
Great.
What do you feel is your calling in life?
I think those are good examples, but they are potentially a little heavy. It depends on how you position it, right? I think if you kind of almost apologetically say, what's your calling in life, right? Because it gives them an out to be like, I don't know, too much, back off, right? And you can kind of read that sign and back off a bit. But at the same time, that may be the question for that person to run with. So I think those are really good examples. How's your life been affected by COVID? I think that's another great example, right? Again, thinking of examples of timeliness, right? And again, for better or worse, we're in the midst of something that really has affected everybody in some form or fashion. And that's not always the case. If you have any kids, where'd you grow up? Exactly. Right. So I think we're hitting on some good examples here. So I'm going to jump to this next one, not to cut anybody off, and we can, come back to some of these things if we want to lean in a little bit more in the larger Q&A, although I think we're transitioning into the Q&A. That's a good sign. Philanthropic centered questions, right? So this can be a tough one depending on who you're talking to and how well you know them, because sometimes you're sitting down with these donors and they don't have a philanthropic history, right? Or if they've done it, it's been pretty passive, responding to a direct mail or something like that. And if they do it, even if they do have some experience, they may not have done a lot of thinking outside the box in terms of the kind of impact that they're trying to have. I'm really interested to see if we can hear some examples or some questions about the question on this one, because I think this is the exact kind of question that you would ask for somebody who is a full-on philanthropist. They know what they're doing. They know how this stuff works probably better than we do. In some cases, don't tell them that. But I think especially if it's somebody who's kind of newer to philanthropy or is trying to find an organization they can wrap their arms around, they may not know how to answer that question exactly. So how are there maybe some gentler ways to start to pull that out? Because to be fair, part of the answer still may be very personal for them because they don't understand your cause. They don't understand your mission. It may be, I want to get a little bit closer to my community because there's some truth in what I'm saying right now. In my job, I tend to travel a lot for work. In the last year, I've been home and I don't feel as tight, tight with my community as I'd like to. Plus it's been difficult, right? So the answer there that I've given is about building relationships with organizations and people who are doing good things in my community. It's not, here's how many students I want to impact with the dollar that I give to the organization. Both are fine. Both are helpful, but you've got to try to position it the right way so that you're not freaking them out, right? But you're also getting them talking about, at least where they are in the process. So, any questions or any examples around that one? Because I think that one is going to very much depend on the context or the person that you may be working with. Favorite gift you gave to charity and why? I think that's excellent, right? Because what you're going to start digging in there is finding out what kind of gifts they give, right? It may be simple. It may be, well, I tend to give to this organization because my mother did, right? Or because I always like the postcard or what have you. So it's soft enough, right? That they're gonna give you some sort of information. And if they say they never have, okay, well, here's your opportunity to do it for the first time. What drives you, right? What motivates you to giving into charity? And I think the other thing too is I don't mean to freak anybody out and suggest that there's going to be people who are not ready for this conversation. They know you're a fundraiser. It's okay, right? Everybody knows you're going to end up asking for money, and that's something that you need to keep in mind. I always do when I get uncomfortable because asking for money is uncomfortable. What has led you to start giving organizations like ours? Perfect, Leo, right? So especially if it's somebody who is, and I think that's a great example, especially for somebody who may have given that, $50 responding to a direct mail or bought something at the silent auction. So now you have their contact information. They were there, right? What started that? And you're going to find out a couple things, right? On one end of the spectrum, you may find out something they're incredibly passionate about, or you may find out that they've never really heard back from the people they've given to before. And that's the miss for them, that they want to work with somebody that's going to keep them up to date on, on why their giving actually makes a difference. What does philanthropy mean to you? I think that's a fascinating one, right? Probably want to build a bit of a rapport before you jump into that one, because they may take it the wrong way, right? I mean, philanthropy, to be fair, there's, there's an argument to say that the largest philanthropists are controlling the world as puppet masters. And I say that only kind of jokingly. I think it's an interesting conversation, right? The more money you have, the more influence that you have on your society. I think we all work in a space where we believe in the power of it. We'd probably be doing something else. But I think you want to kind of understand where the answer might be, right? As you're asking a question like that, but you probably get some fascinating answers and probably some really, thoughtful responses to it, especially if it's something they've thought about before. I think, Denise, I like this question a lot about what the organization could do to improve or serve you better? Probably a good question for somebody who's been around a little bit or has worked with you a little bit, maybe not that long, right? But has had some sort of connection. And especially if you're asking it in a way where we're just trying to get better at this, right? Like every organization, we're trying to get better at what we do. We run a really efficient organization, but the only way to continue to get better is if we have people from, an arm's length away telling us what we're falling short on, right? And then the answer may be, you need to stop calling me. Like, hopefully that's not it, right? But they're probably going to give some insight that'll help you be better about your communication. And it very well could be something that's very specific to the programmatic side of it because they happen to be a bit of an expert in what your organization is doing. Both are incredibly valuable. One, so you know what to do and what not to do to keep them happy. But two, it may be a really helpful idea to the program side of the house. Maybe the kind of thing like, yeah, we've thought of that. Thanks for coming in with another idea, fundraisers, right? But even just bringing that kind of idea, that question to the rest of the team, right? Even if it doesn't have all that much influence, what you've given yourself is something else to talk about in the next conversation. So I was talking to our director of programs about your idea. Here's actually what we've done in the past related to that. Here's why we're not doing it, or here's why we might go forward with it. And thank you for sparking that idea. So I think that's a really good one. All right, I'm going to keep us moving on to the next one here, so we can get into the Wild West on questions. Cause center questions. Again, I think we started to sneak into this one a little bit, right? As we were kind of giving some of the examples is, what about us, right? And I think, again, this probably isn't in the first 5 minutes of sitting down with somebody, but you want to get to this, right? You don't want to have 10 coffees about, trips to Hawaii and transportation costs before you start leaning into what it is you're there to achieve. And I think these are the kinds of questions that are most helpful when they've seen a little bit more than the one pager about your organization, a little bit more than maybe attending one gala. This is a, one tour of your facility or one, interaction with those that you're serving. They've got a little bit of an understanding of what you do. Certainly not an expert, right? Nobody's suggesting that, but a question like this makes them feel like a bit of an expert. Right? Like, well, why are you asking me this? Like, oh, I guess I do have some thoughts. Doesn't mean you have to change the strategy of your organization by any stretch, right? But what it does is it starts to give you an idea of the lens they're looking through as they look at your organization. So same process here. If there's anything that seems incredibly different from kind of what we were just talking about, but I do think these last two, the philanthropic centered questions and the cause centered questions, may bump into each other, right? And that's not a bad thing. If their answer to the philanthropic questions start to be cause-centered questions, you're on the right track. You've kind of stolen a step or two. So we can take a minute if any are coming through on that one, or we can keep rolling too, because I know those were kind of close together. And it also buys me time to take a sip of my coffee.
Doesn't look like any are coming through.
No problem. I think we dug pretty deeply into the last one too. So I think that's great. So we're kind of starting to sneak in toward the kind of the tail end of this again, but I think so. Just some reminders, right? The idea is that you're not trying to convince folks to do stuff. You're not trying to trick folks into doing stuff here, especially in this part of what we're talking about, in this part of the process. You're trying to figure out what they're already excited about. Now, I don't want to be overly Pollyanna about this, right? And say that, if you talk long enough, I'm sure they will believe in your cause. They may not, right? Especially if you're working for an organization that's doing something very specific, right? If you're working to, protect an endangered species, right? But specifically, birds. And another person's like, I don't know, birds creep me out, right? And I hope there's nobody from the Audubon Society on the call. So that's probably a crummy example that was not in my notes. I just thought of that just now. But I think what you are trying to figure out is there something that they are excited about on a personal level that you can tie to the work that you're doing versus forcing them into the importance of your work. Again, I think that's pretty obvious, but through everything we're talking about. But the way I look at this kind of work, those are the kinds of things we need to bring to the surface to remind ourselves what it is we're doing, because so much of this process can start to feel natural, can start to feel like just chatting, right? And just getting to know folks, which it can be, but there are some guardrails within which we want to operate, because we are trying to achieve a particular goal by a particular date, so our organization can do great things. So as we're thinking about some of the techniques, right, in terms of how we're going through this conversation, we've talked about the types of questions and so forth, right? But, clarifying questions, right? So is they're talking, right? If they give you some answers, especially if something's unclear. I mean, I think this often can go without saying, but make it real clear what it is they've said and what it is they're excited about, especially if they're giving you feedback on your organization or the kinds of things that they don't want to see in a relationship like this. But this also allows you to get them talking again about something that's going to be really important, right? So if they started to say, my philanthropic giving, I'm just really excited about, puppies and kittens and, and young people transitioning into college, right? And if your organization is focused on kittens, can we get back? I just want to make sure I've got this. You're talking about the things that you're most passionate about. You did mention kittens among some other things, right? The answer may be yes, right? That may just be a close-ended, that's it. So you're going to have to, figure out your transition to start talking about your organization a little bit more, but it may give them the opportunity to say, yeah, here's what I really love about kittens. And they're talking more and they're giving you more information, whether they realize, that they're giving you fodder for your pitch a little bit further down the line or for your ask a little bit further down the line, but clarifying questions to make sure you've got it right, but also to find ways to get them talking again about something that's going to be most valuable or what you're trying to achieve. Kind of along the same lines, like the summary questions, spitting back to them what you heard. I think that also gives you the opportunity to, it's probably a terrible way to put it, but twist their words a little bit, right? And they'll call you on it, or they should, if you twist them too much. But if they've given you 3 or 4 variables of things that are particularly exciting, to them, and you're able to take 2 of them and say, now, did we hear this, right? Did I hear that part right? And what you've given them as their example of that summary is exactly what you do, right? So let's use this silly example of, puppies and kittens and students transitioning to college. Like, so you were talking about kittens and the transition to college, right? And maybe they've given a few other examples. Like, yeah, those are 2 things that we like to do. Actually, that's exactly what our organization does. I think my example has pretty much run its course on this one, so I'll probably bail on it at this juncture. But the idea is that you're given the opportunity to spit back to them what they've told you, but in a format that's going to make more sense for a future ask, for a future conversation. So this kind of gets back to one of the first points we got to in this discussion is they may not know what they're passionate about as it relates to your organization because they haven't thought about it in that way, and they may not know your organization enough. This is the opportunity to put it back to them in a way that's going to be helpful to you. Agreement questions. Again, the idea there is you're trying to get them on board with the kinds of things that you're doing. So, if they're able to give you information about what they're passionate about, can you make some assumptions? All right, if this is something that you're passionate about, wouldn't you say that we want to improve this part of that issue? Absolutely, for sure. Well, I'm glad you said that because that's actually a program that we're building right now. And I'd love to talk to you more about it, right? So again, the goal of all of these is to guide a discussion towards something that is going to make more sense when you make the larger ask a little bit further down the road. But when you spit these back to them, right, you want them nodding their head. You want them smiling. Like, yeah, you got it, right? You twisted it a little bit because I know you're a fundraiser and that's okay, but you're clearly listening. You're hearing what I'm saying, and you're understanding the importance of tying my own interest to this conversation, if we're gonna keep chatting, because again, the next conversation is very much the goal. So some key donor questions. We'll kind of move through these pretty quickly because I think we've covered a lot of these just kind of naturally and primarily with some of your examples, right? The motivation questions, right? What are you passionate about? Why are you passionate about what we do? Or what is it that you're passionate about? You're trying to figure out why they're sitting with you and why they would sit with you again. Success question. I think we all love that question, especially when you're talking to a company or a foundation. What is success for this partnership? Like, well, impacting millions of people and a check coming in before the end of the year, right? But I think this is important, right, to understand why we're doing this. And it's obviously a joke about the what does success look like, but you need to understand that. I think the hard part is recognizing that it's not going to be as simple as a question and an answer. What success looks like is often something that they're not sure what it looks like. So you have to kind of guide them to that answer or figure it out over time. The frustration question, I think, is a great one, especially if it's somebody that you've either worked with before or your organization's worked with before, or if it's clear they've worked with other organizations before, right? And I don't think you need to be afraid of saying things like, look, I know you've done a lot of this before. Are you best on email or text or call? Would you like me to work with your assistant? Like, what works best? Because I don't want to bother you in the wrong way, right? People appreciate that. We oftentimes try to guess the right move, and I think we're probably pretty good at it in terms of how we communicate with folks. But even things like that can build a stronger rapport, and certainly help them from getting frustrated and working with organizations like ours. Right fit question, again, I think this is for somebody who's a little bit more seasoned in their giving, right, to help them understand, to help understand why they're making the decisions that they're making. Probably further into the conversation. I think you're revealing your cards a bit too early if you ask this in the first chat, because they're trying to build a rapport. Again, the goal is the next conversation. And if you're saying, what could I do to make you give us money? That's kind of what this question would feel like, especially early going in the process. A very important one, but I think needs to be timed right. And this is a good one too, the commitment level question, right? Because we can offer all kinds of volunteer engagement opportunities, tours of our facility, all of that. You want to do that, but people may not want to come. There are plenty of great donors who are like, look, I got too much going on. I like what you're doing. I want to know from afar. And I'll cut my check and read your newsletters. In a few years, when the kids are out of the house, I'm really looking forward to getting a bit closer to this work. There's all kinds of levels of engagement that you're okay with. The hard part is when you don't know how engaged they want to be. Do they want to be left alone? Do they want to be spoken to every Tuesday or Thursday afternoon? So, and I think this is something that can be asked early, kind of a closing question, even in a first conversation. And then we're going to kind of tie this up a little bit. I'm going to, just mention some things that we've talked about before, and then we're just going to open it up and see where the discussion goes. Again, the reality is that this discovery phase lays the groundwork for everything else that's coming. I think we often think about any one of these steps as, all right, well, how does this get to the money, right? Because I need to get on to the next conversation. Keep your expectations in the right place at this phase. You're really trying to get nice, soft ground, 10% chance that they'll donate kind of conversations, right? You don't need to solve it all at this phase. You are laying groundwork. You are softening ground, or whatever metaphor you want to use here. Thoughtful questions to figure out why they're there, right? Why they decide on organizations like yours to donate to, or why they agreed to sit down with somebody knowing very little about the organization. The thoughtfulness of the questions is incredibly important. The pre-planning, right? Again, 1 30-minute coffee conversation does not necessarily warrant 3 hours of prep, depending on the person, right? So maybe it does, but especially in the early phases of these conversations, it's just making sure that you're going through a bit of a process to think about what it is you want to cover in that discussion and where the conversation could go. As Christine mentioned in my intro, hopefully my wife's not listening too closely, though I mentioned her and though she's mentioned in the bio. Apparently I mentioned soccer a whole lot more in the bio. In my coaching experience, what I tell these players is I just haven't found a secret other than just repetition, right? And practicing and getting prepared. I think it's the same thing for the work that we do. If we could find some silver bullet that would make every conversation go smoothly, I would share it here. I don't have it, right? You got to be prepared. You got to talk to yourself in the car, in the shower before those meetings to make sure that you know what you're getting into. And then, the obvious reminder that we'll probably need to keep reminding ourselves over and over is that listening is the key here. You're gathering information, because with that information, you can give them what they want. You can ask them what they want. You can get them close to what they're looking for, regardless of how tied that is to the actual mission of your organization, as silly as that sounds. So listening, says the guy who's been rambling on for the last hour or so. Christine, with that, I think we can kind of open up the floodgates.
Yes, so thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for your engagement so far. We're going to go into the Q&A and discussion now, so please submit any questions or even comments that you have via the Q&A section of the Zoom control panel. So as you're all typing those up, just a friendly reminder that the slide deck and the recording will be sent in the following days for you to review. Also, all of our upcoming live webinars and a full list of our on-demand videos are listed on our website Our next webinar will be next month, June 16th. It will be a panel discussion called Career Advice for Emerging Leaders, Cause Chat with Nonprofit Professionals, and we'd love to see you there, so register today. With that, we can go into our discussion. Again, if you'd like to unmute, feel free to raise your hand and I can allow you all to talk. So let's get started. We had a great comment from Hugo. There is a significant difference between cold calls and calls where an introduction has already been made.
For sure. I think, Hugo, it's such a amen, right? And cold calling stinks. It's no fun. It's weird. It's uncomfortable. I actually work for an organization that, among other things, trains high school and college students to do cold calling, right? To start building their own network, to build their own social capital, right? So, and basically the acknowledgement of it is, this is weird. This is uncomfortable. And we've signed on, whether we meant to or not, to have a job that does entail a bit of this cold calling. So a lot of what we've talked about today is really about once you've gotten the conversation started. I don't know that all of what we've applied or what we've talked about today applies necessarily to that first cold call discussion. You're scratching at something that probably is a whole other webinar, Christine, about how to do that and to do it without losing your mind. But I think, Hugo, I think the best thing I'd say is amen, right? It's a very different thing. Cold calls can become the normal conversations like what we're talking about here, but it's pretty different from the start.
Next question, I think you can probably see it too.
Yeah, I'm with you. So Leo, current donors versus prospective donors. I think it very much depends on the environment, the relationships that are already there, right? So depending on how many fundraisers have been hired by your organization in the last 5 or 10 years, consistent donors or board members kind of see the fundraiser as the gun for hire, right? Revolving door, right? The statistics suggest that, people don't stick around as long if you're in a fundraising role, and sometimes that's the case with organizations and sometimes not. I think when you're talking about a current donor, understanding where the relationship is with the organization. Are they passive? They've been cutting the check. They don't really even remember why. They've just been doing it for a long time. Or on the other end of the spectrum, do they have a really close relationship with the CEO, right? And you need to avoid going around that relationship. But if you can understand what that is, I think you can use some of these same techniques. You're probably just starting the conversation a little differently with, look, either I'm still kind of new to the organization. I'm trying to make sure we're doing as good a job as we possibly can. Move into these questions, right? Whether that's the case or not. If you've been there for a while, you say, some of the things that we've been doing around our fundraising strategy is ensuring that we're keeping good, close relationship with those who have helped us do our work for a very long time. And we're not naive enough to think that we've been doing it perfectly just because donations have been coming in. So, and then you kind of getting into the question. So I think there's a certain level of humility that goes a long way with these fundraising conversations, because people come in with their guard up. They know you're coming to get their money, right? And, that's part of it. And I think that can be a fun part of it. But at the same time, that's not often the driving force about why we do this. It is this part of it. It is understanding people that makes the job interesting. From December 10th through December 31st may be different. You're chasing checks and contracts and so forth like that. But I think I think you can use a lot of the same techniques. You're just probably starting the conversation a little bit differently.
Awesome. Also, we have a hand raised, Lauren. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. I work for a children's mental health agency, and it becomes sometimes challenging to ask a donor why they are attracted to our organization, because it's very personal and you don't want to get into someone's mental health history for HIPAA reasons and otherwise. Is there a suggestion, I guess, one, on the best way to approach such a delicate subject with a donor? And the other is, when you do have an answer that speaks specifically to our programming, like, oh, yes, I found out about your organization because my child, I lost my child to suicide. They then start to treat you as if you're a clinician. How do I navigate those paths? Do you have good suggestions for that?
Yeah, it's a heck of a question, Lauren, and I'll give you kind of my reaction to it, but I also don't want to suggest that I've got the silver bullet. I think as it relates to that, kind of the first part of that question, I think part of this is kind of just keeping your expectations in the right place about how long it may take you to get to some of the answers to some of the questions that we talked about today, right? I think especially for the situation you're describing, the rapport, the trust, the conversations about Hawaii and how little you played the guitar in the last year, whatever, right? The stuff that may not be connected to the mission is probably even more important in that kind of environment with that kind of organization, because they're really going to need to feel connected to you to be willing to have that conversation. And the second part of it, if they start to move into discussions that are beyond your pay grade, right? To put it lightly, I think it's fair to call that out. Be like, look, this is exactly the kind of thing that our organization addresses. The reality is, though, I help connect the dots with folks that can help us do the work. What I'd love to do is get our director of operations into a conversation with the three of us, because I think some of the things that you're sharing will be helpful for us to figure out our next steps as an organization. And that person will probably be able to answer some of your more detailed questions even than I can, right? Our job as fundraisers is to know a little bit about everything our organization does. The longer you're there, the more work you put in, the more you know, right? And you get to a point where hopefully you really are the expert. But again, they know you're a fundraiser, and that's okay, because that is the role that you play, especially even if you do know things as well as the director of operations. There's a point where it's not your voice to share it. And I don't mean from a HIPAA standpoint or anything like that, but just from a confidence standpoint from the donor's perspective, there's always going to be this little hint of, did they get that answer because they're trying to get my money? And I don't mean to be so, just downer and all this, but I think it's part of the reality. So if it's a question that you could answer, but it's a little bit stronger coming from the expert in your organization, bring them into the fold. If it's a question you can't answer, I think the humility goes a long way, and be like, look, that's such a good question that I can't even answer it. Good news is our organization can, and I'd like to set up another call or another coffee. We can bring that person in, because I think you all would be able to ... So for what that's worth, those are kind of my responses to those questions.
Thank you. That was great. Very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. That was a great question. Moving back to the Q&A box, we have something from Adam. On average, this is kind of a general question. On average, how many in-person touches would you recommend making with a donor each year? And is this different for a new donor, returning donor, or recurring donor?
You're going to love my answer. Totally depends, right? And I think, and it's such a cop-out, Adam, and I'm sorry, but I think it's a little bit of a sliding scale, right? On some level, the more money they give, the more often you want to be in touch with them, for obvious reasons, right? But that's you. That's the fundraiser's, preference, right? I think it gets into time management. You probably shouldn't spend the same amount of minutes on a Zoom call with somebody who gives $50 and probably has the capacity to give $50, right, for the next 10 years. You don't want to spend that much more time than somebody who's got the capacity to, make a $500,000 capital campaign gift, right? So that is part of it. I think another variable is what they want, right? And again, that's the purpose of all of these questions. The better you understand the person, the more you're going to understand, what they want to deal with. Probably one of the most interesting and maybe best board members I've ever worked with at the local Boys and Girls Club up in Santa Ana was a guy who was, choosing my words wisely, very rough around the edges. Pushed the leadership of the organization as far as they could go. He didn't want to see the e-blasts. He didn't want the stewardship calls. He wanted to show up to the meetings. He wanted to see the financials. And if things were going all right and there was nothing in the news about things that we had done wrong, checks showed up. And he was the biggest donor that we had. Really frustrating for a talkative guy like me who wants to tell him all the great things we're doing. He didn't care. He just didn't care, right? And so there's kind of your answer. He didn't get a lot of touches, but was our biggest donor. So again, I apologize. I wish there was a more clear answer to that. But I think you have to consider those variables and then think about your own capacity as an organization and how many donors you currently have. You need to put time toward current donors because it's easier to keep them around than it is to be doing cold calling and find someone else. But I think the wishy-washy answer I'll give is really time management and understanding where the donor wants you to spend their time. But if nothing else, recognize There's not a simple answer. So if you're ever frustrated by that, you're like, am I spending time on the right things? Try to step back, talk to a peer, bounce ideas off of each other, but you're not missing something obvious, in my opinion. I don't think it's ever quite that simple.
And I think that also answers your other question, Adam, of how does donor capacity impact the amount of time spent preparing and meeting with them. So
I worked with somebody who was who ran the Boys and Girls Club in Phoenix, and I was pretty early in my career when she told me this. So I don't know if she was just joking and messing with me or not, but she figured out how much money she needed to raise per hour. And if the meeting didn't feel like it was going to raise that much money, she wouldn't take it. And I wouldn't suggest that, right? Because that assumes you know all the facts about how much money there is and how quickly they will give it. But it's part of it. It's something to consider.
Looks like we have a lot of comments from Pella that are really great. They said, as a board member, I have the talks that move the relationship to the next step. I am in contact with staff so that I stay on track and keep the relationship moving, and the staff is also aware. That's a great thing to hear.
Yeah, Pella, that's an interesting one too, because I think what we're always trying to do is, especially as fundraisers who don't have as many people on our teams as we probably like, as many resources as we probably like, if you have a well-run, really engaged board, you've got an army, right? And again, every board's different. The priorities for the board are a little bit different. Governance comes first if that's part of the responsibilities, but a close second, my biased opinion, really needs to be about the fundraising efforts, right? So, Pella, I see you raise your hand, so I don't want to start rambling on about questions when you could probably jump in and clarify.
Yeah, thanks for taking it. So yeah, I am a full-time board member, and I'm very clear that I'm interested in fundraising. And I know that's very unusual when I'm telling biz dev or development people, that's what I'm interested in. So I'm not interested in governing boards. Unlike the gentleman you just talked about, don't show me the profit and loss. I don't care about all that stuff. I want to get behind the mission. Who can I talk to? I want to work with the staff so they stay on track, move it forward. And I'm not afraid to call the $50 a year person, because, and it just happened last week, $50 a week, $50 a year for the last 10 years. And I looked at this and I said, why is this person doing that? And the person that was part of this service, the program, she had died in 2011. So there was something driving this person. I had to know, practicing the art of curiosity, right? And so she says, hey, I retired. My mom died, loved the program, blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, I said, so do you have kids? We're just talking. She says, no kids. I said, oh, you own your own home? She says, yeah. Earlier in the conversation, she said, I've retired. I only send $50 once or twice a year. I wish I could do more. So later in the conversation, no kids, she owns her house. Have you thought about a legacy or philanthropic, maybe 5 or 10% of the total value? So now I'm going back to the staff, making sure they have it in their notes so that if I'm gone, dead, whatever, forget, somebody else will be able to pick this up. And that's why it's really important as a board member, fundraiser, to really work with staff so that they have the information, and we're all not being I'm not being a maverick, but yet I'm taking advantage of my proactive, on purpose, with purpose, not afraid to ask any kind of question, because people know that I care about them. Once people know that you care about them, you can ask them almost anything, and then it's just about the delivery. So it really works. Personally, I don't see what the big difficulty is, but I know that everybody has to learn and start wherever they are, and I get that.
My suggestion, Pello, if that's not an assumed name, you should probably use an assumed name on these things, because all of us want to work with you, because that's what board members should be doing, in my opinion, right? And I think you're right. I think there's, especially for the flexibility you can have in terms of the types of folks or the level of folks that you want to interact with. It doesn't sound like you're having an issue with anybody, along the spectrum, but the reality is some board members have not done it before, so they're a little freaked out by it. But you need to show them, like you're saying, that it's not as complicated as it may seem to be. So there are entry points for how you start to get your board members to do this. For one, you need the approval at the leadership level, right? The CEO
Right.
and the board chair agree, this is what we want our board to do. Sometimes that's a lift, but that's an incredibly important part of it. Find ways to get all of those board members involved in, and again, I understand capacity is part of this question, but ideally you've got a fundraising plan for everybody on the board, or for a fundraising committee if it's not going to be everybody all at once, because sometimes this takes time. And usually the first step to this for somebody who's like, I'd like to help, but man, I do not like asking for money. Give them 10 people to thank. Give them 10 people to call who've given the $50 and just say, hey, I'm Tim. I work at this organization. I'm passionate about it. Thank you. Conversation picks up from there. And there's another piece of this, fellow. There's a very different conversation that you as a board member can have than the fundraiser can have. No matter what is said, what's asked, what the responses are, they believe you more because you
there's just
volunteer.
something about the credibility, but also I wanted to say that the role play, I can't underestimate that part, and people giving feedback and everybody going around it. I think the best thing ever, and I make 5 cold call telephone calls every day. And it started back when I was 25 years old, and I went through a training program that included cold calling. And because of that cold calling, I had to make 100 calls a day. And when I didn't connect with any of them, the supervisor said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm making 100 phone calls a day. And he said, no, you're calling 100 people to make 100 appointments, different focus. And so once I learned that, I understood rejection and no doesn't matter to me anymore.
I'm with you.
The next.
And I'm with you, Phil. I want to get onto this next question.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You go. But I want to point something out, Christine. Whenever we do board development sessions, get Pello in there, right? Because we can talk all day about the importance of what he's saying, but somebody who's actually doing it carries a bit more weight. So Pello, thank you for focusing on that a little bit. I think it's such a powerful part of everything we're talking about here. We didn't scratch at it much, but man, oh man, there's your army. There's your solution to not having the staff that you need. Shannon, I agree with you. Hugo, this is such a great question, and I'll start, but I'm open to other thoughts here if you can drop them into the Q&A. But in terms of the difference of, really over the last 5 or 10 years, but also really with COVID, from where we sit, most of the work that I do now is primarily with companies and foundations, a little bit less on the individuals, at least in the last couple of years. There was, and I'm being pretty general, there were a few months of holy shit, excuse my language, what are we doing here? Nobody knew what it was, right? The same way we were all just kind of going through life. I think by the time we got to July, August, the more progressive organizations, and I would say the more progressive philanthropists were saying, it's clear to me what we need to address. I'm comfortable changing paths a little bit further down the road, but this has got to be focused on equity, or this needs to be focused on getting people healthy, right? So what's happened is we've just gotten very focused about the most important things in philanthropy for the moment. Hopefully we can solve one of them quickly, right? And I think we're making some progress again, at least in the United States. But we've also brought to the surface an element of really everything that all of our organizations should be considering is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it fits into the conversation that we have as an organization and the work that we do. I think there's been a lot of, and I put my organization very much into this bucket, is we've always thought about this, but over the course of the last year, we recognized how good a job we have or have not done. So it's going to be very important, I think, for us, and I'm getting real soapboxy here, but I think it's really important for us as fundraisers, who are also the voices of our organizations, whether we like it or not, to not treat that piece of it as just a fly-by-night thing that's really cool in the moment and going to help folks get closer to organizations. This is something that we have the ability to have major influence on our organizations because the money coming in the door helps us get where we need to go. And let's take advantage of the fact that an incredibly important conversation has started to rise to the surface. And it's, I think, in my opinion, it's one of our responsibilities to keep it at the surface with how we conduct our conversations and where we direct, where we try to direct those gifts. So I think that's related more to the last, 12, 15 months. over the course of the last 5 or 10 years, it's almost hard to look at it, right? Because the last year has been so nutty. But I think what I'd say over the last 5 or 10 years probably goes back even, into 20 years, is that the donor is getting savvier about what they want, not necessarily savvier about what you do, right? What your organization does and the impact that you're able to create, but they're getting savvier about what they want and what they're asking from the donor, or excuse me, from the fundraiser, from the organization. It's on us to recognize that. So what that means is I think we're coming in with either more knowledgeable donors that we're sitting down with, or donors that think they're more knowledgeable. I don't mean that to sound as mean as it does, but I think that's an important part of it. Our job is to meet these folks where they are and to get them where we believe the conversation should go. And go back to, the early days of, United Way, right? One of the purposes was to be able to make decisions about where dollars could go for individuals and companies who wouldn't have been able to figure it out, because in 1972, you couldn't Google it, right? And I'm oversimplifying, quite a bit. But the thing is, the answers to the questions you have about who you should work with, who you want to work with, who you want to donate to, they are in theory at your fingertips, right? So I think we're coming in with more knowledgeable donors. And if not that, more confident donors, whether they should be or not, in terms of their understanding of what your organization does. But that's just my reaction, because this is a question that depends totally on your perspective, and kind of what you've been in the thick of, especially over the last 15 months or so.
That is true. Well, thank you, everyone. We are coming up to the end of our time together. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for your participation in our Q&A and your engagement throughout this webinar. We are very thankful and grateful for you all. And again, a reminder that you will be able to receive a link to access this slide deck and the recording and a follow-up email in the next following days. But I'd just like to thank our presenter, Tim. Thank you so much for taking the time to present and sharing your experiences and your stories. It was very helpful, I know, for myself and from some others in the comments. So thank you. Tim's contact information is on the screen and available to you. Again, you'll be receiving this in the slide deck. Before we end this, Tim, do you have any last minute words or advice you'd like to share?
I'd say thank you for all the comments, for all of the discussion, because again, I'm going to try to book into this with what I said at the beginning, is that this is a learning for me and a learning environment for all of us, just because I don't get to have these kinds of conversations with folks on a daily basis. So the people I'm talking to this afternoon are in real trouble, because my tools are a bit sharper than they were this morning from this. And obviously that's a bit tongue in cheek, but the reality is I truly believe that these discussions are what's going to get us better at this on an individual level. And I really do, not to be, overstate our influence, but I think there's a real responsibility for the work that we do, because whether we drive the strategy of an organization or not in our job descriptions, we do by default, because our organizations rely on the dollars coming in the door. So how we position those conversations and how we position those funders and build those relationships, it's core to the success of the organizations that we work for. So I'll leave you with that heavy burden, but thank you all for taking the time, because I know how tough it is to jump out of the middle of a busy day, and just hope everybody's seeing good things ahead. It's been a crazy year, especially in the fundraising world, but thank you all for your engagement in this and for the work that you're all doing.
Yes, thank you to our audience again for your time and participation. There will be a survey that can pop up right after the end of this webinar, and we would greatly appreciate if you would take a few minutes to complete the survey that will appear on your screen, just to help us continue to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure that we're providing value to you all. So if you could take the chance to do that. But again, we hope you all are staying safe and healthy. Please enjoy the rest of your day and week, and thank you all for what you do to better the communities in which we live, work, and play. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.